It's now my pleasure to introduce a very special person, a great Houstonian, a great Texan, obviously a great University of Texas Longhorn, the men's athletics director for the University of Texas at Austin. He played linebacker at UT in 1968. He helped start the 30-game winning streak, the longest in the history of the storied University of Texas Longhorn football program, one of the longest in NCAA history, in fact. A great gentleman, a big supporter of everyone in this state, and especially the University of Texas system. Please welcome Mike Perrin. Mike? There you go, buddy.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, and what a great evening this is. Thanks to all of y'all for being here tonight. It really is special for all of us, but especially for the children who will benefit from the great event we're having here tonight. How about the Longhorn Band? My first game as athletic director, the very first stop I made that afternoon was with the Longhorn Alumni Band. They were practicing. That's one of the great events of the year when the Longhorn Band comes into Texas Memorial Stadium, and you see people from so many years back who love the University of Texas, love the football program, and come back year after year after year. Last year I met two ladies who were in the marching band 1952 when women were first allowed to march in the Longhorn Band, the show band of the Southwest. And what a thrill that was. And thank you all again for being here tonight, Longhorn Band. We appreciate you. We're going to spend a few moments talking to a great Texan, a great American, a great citizen of the world in a few moments. But before we do that, we've got a video to introduce him to you a little bit, and then we'll pick up with the rest of the show after that. So enjoy what you're about to see. Thank you.
So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. If you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not by the size of their flippers. If you want to change the world, you must be your very best in the darkest moments.
There are a total of 10 such life lessons, simple lessons, maybe even obvious to some. But what kind of man could utilize such simple tools to change the world? Admiral McRaven grew up the son of a career Air Force officer stationed at Pope Air Force Base in the low hills of Pinehurst, North Carolina. It would be his mother's ties to Texas that would anchor him to our great state. He had always been an athlete, a scuba diver at age 13, a high school football player, and a star track competitor, earning him a scholarship to the University of Texas in Austin. There he would meet George Ann Brady, marry shortly after graduation, and raise 3 children through 38 years of a military career that had them celebrating anniversaries, blowing out birthday candles, and kissing their children goodnight in what seemed to be always a new city, a new country, as they circled the globe.
And my husband told me that we might travel and move a little bit. I had no idea. So he ended up being in for 38 years, and we moved every 2 or 3 years. We saw the world, and so did our children, and I think it was a good experience for all of us.
When we think of our military leaders, we may not think of them in terms of regular people with regular problems and stresses that add to the mental toll that service takes on these brave men and women of our military. But the man who did lead that final push to kill a terrorist was a father, a warrior, and a man with a physical body subject to the same illnesses and diseases he hopes to help combat as he leads the UT system. It took such a man to formulate a strategy to liberate the world from a fanatic's attacks, taking years of focused dedication, all his skills in knowing how to lead young men into battle. his steadfast determination in accomplishing a goal the whole world depended on for its future safety. All his life experiences had prepared him for this mission. As a young lieutenant, McRaven commanded a squad for SEAL Team 6, next an entire platoon for SEAL Team 4. After earning his master's degree, he commanded task units in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, then returned to command SEAL Team 3. President Obama raised McRaven to 4-star Admiral Chief, and Congress enthusiastically approved the promotion while McRaven worked on Neptune's Spear, the operation designed to eliminate bin Laden. But if you were to ask this decorated hero what he's most proud of or what most fulfilled him, he wouldn't even mention the capture of bin Laden.
In Texas, nobody comes up to me and says, you're the guy that led the bin Laden raid, but they come up to me all the time and say, you're the guy that gave the commencement speech. I'm happy to have that be my legacy and forget all the rest of it. But I look at the students, they're kind of my troops. My responsibility is to them.
The struggles that challenged the moral fiber of his family were enough to break the spirit of any man. But it took the courage and determination of a great man to meet those challenges and take on the task of improving the way veterans' hospitals care for our military. So that's where he started on his journey to improve the good things that flow from all members of the University of Texas system. He knew that good men have to be their best during their darkest nights, and that hope can change the world. He also knew that the size of our hearts makes us great, but he understood as well as anyone that simply knowing these things isn't enough, that we must have a clear vision of how we want our future to unfold, to lead by example, to make our bed, as he puts it. Today, people the world over benefit from programs taught at the University of Texas academic and research facilities. From the Panhandle to the Barrier Islands, shining cities and rural landscapes, the Hill Country, and throughout all of Texas, 14 separate organizations serve under the umbrella of University of Texas, and our Chancellor serves them all. Chancellor McRaven, he's a man who's changed our world and thinks all UT students are heroes in the making. He thinks that the system is graduating students who are capable of leading productive lives while making the world a better, safer place, where good health and productivity is an attainable goal for all, where lives can be enriched with the touch of someone who cares, and dreams can come true with a helping hand and a large dose of hope and confidence. For Admiral McRaven, his military career was the stuff of dreams, but his determination to be of service to mankind is the fabric of life. He'll lead us to a future where well-being and joy thrive. William H. McRaven, 4-star Admiral. Who else should lead a distinguished system of learning steeped in such a rich history of service as the University of Texas? Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are proud and honored to welcome no other than our esteemed hero and leader, Texas Children's Cancer Center 2016 legend, Chancellor Bill McRaven.
Good evening, Admiral.
Good evening, Michael.
It's an honor and privilege to be on the stage with you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to ask you to tell us what you were like as a little boy. Were you rambunctious? Were you active? Tell us a little bit about
Well, I was clearly
those early
asleep in
days.
right field from that one picture. Growing up here in Texas, frankly, I had a great childhood. My father had been a pro football player, a fighter pilot. My mother was born and raised here in Texas. My father, as I say, got here as soon as he could. But as a kid, they allowed us to do things that, I think kids struggle to do today. I mean, I was hunting by the time I was 10. I was always getting in trouble, broken bones, broken knees, broken legs. And it was part of a wonderful, wonderful youth that I look back upon very, very fondly.
I heard that you were well known to the doctors at the hospital there for various broken
God bless
bones
my
and
mother.
other injuries.
At Wilford Hall Hospital at Lackland Air Force Base, I think I was in there every week with something.
Tell us about your mother. I've heard she was a remarkable lady. I'd like to know about your mother.
She was. My mother was born in Grapeland, Texas, in East Texas, and went to Sam Houston State Teachers College back then, and then married my father after the war, and lived the life of a great Air Force wife. They moved around quite a bit. By the time I was born, Dad was a full colonel. We spent time in France, and then he moved back here to Lackland Air Force Base. And she was, again, I guess I would think of her as kind of the quintessential, Texas lady. Always very graceful, always very kind to everybody. Even though she grew up in Texas in a time when racism prevailed and things were not the way we would like them to be, she raised me to look at everybody for what they were. And it was not about the color of your skin or where you came from. It was, again, about the quality of the person. And I learned that first and foremost from my mother and then my father. Again, part of being in the military was always this recognition that, you do your job. You carry your rucksack, as we say in the special operations. And if you do that, nobody cares what your background is. They don't care what your color is. They don't care what your ethnic background is. They don't care what your orientation is. They just want you to come in and do your job and do it well. And that's the great thing about the military. It's very much a meritocracy. And that was a lesson my mother taught me at a very young age, to respect everybody until they prove otherwise. And she was, again, a very, very gracious lady.
How many years did you spend in the military? 37?
37, going on 38 years. Yeah.
A warrior?
Well, I like to think I was a good officer that did my job well. The real warriors, when you look out at the young men and women today, particularly the 9/11 group that I was fortunate enough to lead. I mean, these are true warriors. These are men and women that were in hard combat, certainly after 9/11, almost every day in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was fortunate to lead them, but I'm always careful to make sure people understand. Warrior has a special meaning to it in the military. I was a good officer, and I like to think I did a good job, but the real heroes out there were the young men and women that are part of this 9/11 generation.
Well, the reason I asked that question is I've heard that your mother taught you to enjoy a particular art form, that you have books of poetry accessible, and that you enjoy poetry. Is that true? I'm just trying to draw a contrast.
So I want to know where you got your intel, Mike. I mean, this is...
I'll never tell.
If it's my sister, I'm going to hunt her down. I'm telling you that right now. My mother loved poetry. She kept the classic 101 famous poems. When she passed away, she left me a copy. Poetry was just part of our life growing up.
Does it remain a part of your life today?
It does. It does. I probably have 2 or 3 poetry books on my bedstand, and I'll pick up and read one of them. I kind of like the classic poems, but I am learning. The great folks over at UT Austin periodically send me poetry books that really don't resemble a lot of what I'm used to, but I'm learning.
Well, we are a cutting-edge research,
absolutely.
At university, so maybe we're researching the cutting edge of poetry. I heard that your mother at one point in time wanted you to be a medical doctor. Can you talk about that a little bit and tell us how that came about and why she had such a high value on?
Well, again, she grew up in Grapeland, Texas, and there was, as I recall, one doctor in Grapeland, Texas. And that doctor, and I believe it was Dr. Kennedy, everybody knew Dr. Kennedy. I mean, he brought all the kids into the world. Anytime there was a problem, everybody went to Dr. Kennedy, and I think she recognized that the value that a doctor brings to a small town and to a large city like Houston is invaluable. My grandfather on my father's side was a doctor in both World War I and World War II. He got his MD in St. Louis in 1910, and then, of course, was young enough to make World War I. And then after World War I was over, he came back to Missouri, and then, Bad fortune would have it, he was around for World War II, so served in both those wars. And my great-grandfather was a doctor. So there were a lot of doctors in the family. Frankly, I don't think she had done the SAT on me to determine that I probably was not going to be a doctor. I was fortunate to get into the University of Texas, but that's when it was an open admissions, thank God.
Amen to that. Amen to that. A lot of folks in this room. We know, of course, that you've long had an interest in athletics. Tell us a little bit about your early athletic career, and I should caution you that I do have some intel here. So,
well, and again, my father was an incredible athlete. He went to Murray State and played football, baseball, basketball. Went on to play professional football for the Cleveland Rams. But the interesting thing about Dad was I don't think I knew that until I was probably halfway through high school. Dad was not a guy that talked a lot about his wartime or his, and he was a fighter pilot during World War II. Didn't talk about his wartime or growing up as an athlete. And I think he recognized, one, I was a very small child growing up. I didn't hit my growth spurt till late in high school. And I think Dad probably knew that there would be a lot of pressure on me. How can I be anywhere close to what my dad was as the incredible athlete that he was? So I got on the football team my freshman year in high school. I sat the bench for 2 years, and you get a great perspective sitting on the bench. My junior year, I decided that I better try something new. Started running track in high school, and that worked out pretty well. I was a miler in high school. Then I was fortunate enough to come to the University of Texas and walk onto their track team. But I tell you, I was not near the caliber of athlete that they had at UT. I mean, we had some phenomenal milers. I think we had 7 milers under 4:05. I mean, I was a 4:15 miler. I was struggling to keep up with these guys. But again, a great experience being part of the University of Texas, any University of Texas athletic program. But at one point in time, 2 years into it, I started off as a freshman. I was 6'2", 150 pounds. By the end of my sophomore year, I'm 6'2", 185 pounds. And the coach comes up to me and he says, Bill, we don't have any 185-pound milers. And oh, by the way, you're not very good. So that ended my miling career.
just so you know, I did speak with Coach James Blackwood, and he speaks most highly of you then and now, and takes great delight.
He was a great coach.
He really takes
coach,
great delight in the accomplishments you've had. Tell us a little bit about your view on athletics in general. Just how do you feel about athletics in a university context?
Yeah, it's, and again, part of this is growing up in an athletic family. As you saw, growing up a kid in Texas, you played baseball, I played basketball, I was on the football team, and athletics, and one of the things that my father certainly instilled in me is, if you want to be a good athlete, it is about discipline. It's about, particularly when I was running track, you'd get up before school, you'd run hard miles, you'd go to school, you'd run after school, and sometimes you'd catch an evening run. You have to be very disciplined on a team sport like baseball and football, basketball. It is all about the team. And I love the team sports because you realize very quickly it ain't about you. It is about the team. Track was about you, even though there was the track team. At the end of the day, it was about your individual performance. But what I loved about the team sports was it really was about the team. And that was great because when I graduated from the University of Texas and went to the SEALs, they're called the SEAL teams for a reason. We call ourselves the teams. And this is because you realize it's never about you. And the moment you begin to think it's about you, you're no longer a very good teammate. And that's what athletics sports teaches you.
During the time that you were at the University of Texas in your undergraduate days, you were also a member of the ROTC, were you not? Can you describe for us what ROTC life is like and some of the things you took from that into your later military career?
Yeah, and I went into the Naval ROTC unit. I knew nothing about the Navy when I started. And again, it was an interesting transition. My father had been in the Air Force, but again, he didn't really push the Air Force on me. I went into the Navy because I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. And I knew this was a good path for me. But like athletics, ROTC teaches you leadership. You may not be the quarterback of the team, or you may not be the middle linebacker, but at the end of the day, the expectation when you're in ROTC is you're going to lead. And so from the time you are a freshman, the ROTC puts you in leadership positions. And they give you an opportunity to fail. They know you're 18 years old, you've got a challenge in front of you, and they put challenges in front of you, and you fail. And a lot of times, they know you're not going to succeed on that. They want to find out how well you handle pressure and how well you handle failure. But each step of the way, the ROTC unit does a great job, I think, of teaching you how to succeed. I tell folks one of the greatest lessons I learned in between your freshman and sophomore year in Naval ROTC, we went on what was euphemistically called a cruise. And as a midshipman, as an officer in the making, they put you on a ship as an enlisted man. And so for 9 weeks, I was on what was called a fast frigate, which was a pointy-nosed ship, and you're an enlisted man. And the lessons you learn are invaluable for the rest of your life because it's a little bit like the mailroom. I mean, you start off, you are swabbing the decks, you are cleaning the heads, you are chipping paint, you're working in the boiler room, and the lesson learned is don't ever forget, no matter how senior you get, don't ever forget that the decisions you make affect those guys that are chipping paint, that are cleaning the heads, that are in the boiler room. And so this concept of professional distance and making sure that, you know, if you're an ensign in the Navy, don't ever forget that you're leading troops and the decisions you make are going to affect those troops. Sometimes it's easy as you get more senior that professional distance grows. And your challenge, I think, as an officer is never let that professional distance get too wide that you forget how important it is to take care of the troops.
In addition to your track and ROTC activities, I'm informed you majored in journalism. Can you talk about that a little bit as a major and some of the things you drew from that later in life?
Yeah, okay. Well, the truth be told, I started off in pre-med. That did not go so well. I went to accounting. That one even worse. There were a lot of good-looking women in journalism. I'd like to tell you that I had some real thoughtful reasons for going into the School of Journalism. You know, you're 19 years old. Sure. You know, for God's sake, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And I could write. Again, part of this was, I think, growing up in a culture. My mother was an English teacher. And the Texas school system back then, down in San Antonio, you learned to write. I didn't know how to diagram a sentence, but you knew how to write. So frankly, making the transition my junior year into journalism was great. The School of Journalism, you not only wrote a lot, but you had to learn a lot. They expected you as a journalism major to know a lot about, you know, a lot of things, or a little bit about a lot of things. So I took classes in Sufi mysticism and Khalil Gibran and philosophy, and so you broadened your horizons, and then you wrote about it. And frankly, those skills served me very, very well when I went into the military.
Let me skip around a little bit, then I'm going to come back and fill in a little bit between college and now, but it's currently been about 17 months since you traded in your Navy uniform, and thank you for coming to the University of Texas. We greatly appreciate it and appreciate your leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process worked to get you to that position and how different it is to lead that system as compared to your Special Operations Command?
Yeah, I was getting ready to retire in August of 2014, and candidly hadn't really taken an opportunity to look at my options. In April of that year, a secret envoy was sent to my home in Tampa to talk to me about being the Chancellor of the University of Texas system. And sat down for about an hour, and I went through a number of things, and finally, at the end of the discussion, I said, yeah, I really have only one question. And she said, what's that? And I said, what's a chancellor? I mean, yeah, 15 institutions at the time and all this. And I said, yeah, I got it, but what's a chancellor? I mean, I was a student. And I remembered who my RA was, you know, some of my faculty members, and, you know, the president's signature, I'm sure, is on my diploma. God, I hope it is. But you know, you didn't know who the chancellor was. So as we kind of talked through that, you know, coming off my job at the time as the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, I knew you had to have the energy, you had to have the passion to be able to lead a great organization like this. And candidly, I had to think about it for a few months. And Georgianne and I, my wife and I mean, we walked every night in Tampa, and we would talk about this opportunity. The regents came down, 3 of the regents came down to visit me, I think in June timeframe. And the one thing that I was impressed, these were 3 white guys, all of whom I think were billionaires or 100 millionaires, and their focus was on the Rio Grande Valley. And what can we do for the Hispanic population of Texas? And recognizing that Texas is about to become a minority-majority state, It was about the kids. And I tell you, in talking to all three of them, there was such passion about here's what can happen if you're the Chancellor of the University of Texas. You can shape the lives of 217,000 kids. And, not just kids, but obviously, non-traditional students, and you have an opportunity to be part of medical schools and the great work that's going on here in Houston. And what I loved about the military was the opportunity to help the young men and women and their families. And so to me, this really was an opportunity to continue that. I did come and make the commencement speech in May, and it was just a special night. I mean, it was a beautiful Texas night. The towers behind you. It was warm. Again, you had a chance to look out in the audience, 8,000 some odd students and their families. And I thought, this is something special. And I have loved every minute of it. And the transition from running special operations to running the UT system really was pretty seamless. I mean, I've been running large organizations for a long time. It's always about the people. You have to know how to treat people. I get back to the lesson I learned from my mother. I mean, you have to respect everybody. You start off from that. And the one thing you'll learn in the military is everything you do has to be moral, legal, and ethical. If you do those things, you're going to be successful. And there were so many similarities. I mean, I had staff meetings in the morning. I did troop visits to see the students and the faculty. I was up on the Capitol Hill when I was in uniform, and here I'm up at the Capitol during the legislative session. So all these things were very familiar to me. The one thing that surprised me, and it took me several months to recognize this, frankly, was the great folks in Texas and how giving and how gracious they are of their resources. Nobody gives the military money. Or the taxpayers do, but nobody signs up and says, I want to sponsor that ship there, and I'm prepared to give you money for it. But the people in Texas come out because they love their institutions. And it's not about the money, it is about their passion to see things done well, their passion to make a difference, whether it's at Texas Children's Cancer Center or any of the great institutions that are part of the UT system. And that was something I had never seen before, and that is inspiring.
When you were in the service in your later years of your career there, and then again as Chancellor, you spent time testifying before legislative committees and various hearings on issues, and you did so in Washington. Do you have any comparison or contrast between that process on Capitol Hill in Washington and at the Capitol in Austin?
Yeah, I love the way things operate here in Texas. I really do. And I think that surprises folks, but what I didn't see up in D.C., which I see here every time I'm meeting with the legislature, is the nature of the citizen lawmaker. They come here for 140 days, they bust their hump, they've got a small staff, and at the end of the day, you're building bridges and roads and financing schools, and you're doing things that you can see the tangible results of it. They're all very passionate about it. They're supporting their constituency in a way that I didn't see up on Capitol Hill. And I loved my engagement with them. Now, we didn't always agree, but gosh, they were passionate about it. And at the end of the day, 140 days, bills get signed, the governor signs things, and next thing you know, things are moving. So I think it's a fabulous system. I wish we could, export some of it up to Washington, D.C.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. A few of us that have been around a while recall that when General Eisenhower left the service, he promptly went to Columbia University, where he served 2 years as president. Are we seeing any sort of an Eisenhower moment here?
None whatsoever. I really love being here at UT. I hope to be here for a long time. And again, I honestly believe you can make more of a difference right here in Texas. As I said, what happens here at Texas Children's, what happens with the 217,000 students, I mean, you will see the results of the decisions you make today in a very short order. And so no, I'm very happy right where I am.
I'm delighted to hear that. I read in one of your speeches when you were about to become chancellor that at first your focus was on how to make the institutions better. You were focusing on the institutions as institutions, but that over a relatively short period of time you began to change your viewpoint on the institutions and their input. Can you tell us what that change was?
Well, again, part of the military is you learn to be a servant leader. and your responsibility is to the institutions and the people below you. And no matter how senior you get, you kind of turn and you look at those folks and you say, look, my job is to get you the resources, to provide you the leadership, the guidance, whatever you need. And absolutely that's what I hope to do here as the Chancellor. But part of my education here in the first couple months, I was reading a book called Systemness 3.0. And there was a great article by a former chancellor, not a UT chancellor, a UC system chancellor, who said, you can never forget as a state institution that your obligation, first and foremost, is to the state of Texas. The institutions are here to support the state of Texas. So that mindset, as simple as it is, I mean, I was kind of focused downward, and obviously I still have that responsibility, but you have to start off first, and you have to say, what are the needs of Texas? What does Texas need, and what can we do to make Texas better? And that simple thought kind of changed a lot about how I hope to go forward as the Chancellor of the University of Texas System.
I'll come back in a moment and talk about some of those outward looks that you took. I want to go back to a comment you made a moment ago about in the military activities and the thought process and decisions must be legal, ethical, and moral.
Right.
And I want to go back to May of 2011 when your team successfully captured bin Laden. Y'all had practiced that.
He's dead, by the way. We decided it was.
I heard that. You planned that.
We did.
You planned it. You planned it a lot.
Right.
You practiced it.
We did.
He was killed that night.
He was.
Here's a man who set in motion events that caused billions of dollars of damage, killed thousands of people, changed all sorts of transportation and other practices here in this country. Your men prepared, trained, sought, did, executed him.
Right.
And yet, part of the training was you insisted that a proper burial be done. Tell me your thought process on that, because to me that is the epitome of ethics and morality.
Yeah, you know, the mission to get bin Laden, as I said, was really a culmination of everybody's effort. You know, the SEALs tend to get, you know, all the credit for this, but we had a very large task force that was involved. There were Army helicopter pilots that flew us in. We had intelligence folks. We had Air Force guys flying, all sorts of surveillance. But the real point here is it was, again, the hundreds of thousands of troops that started after 9/11 in both Afghanistan and Iraq that I think you know, deserve most of the credit for this. We were just kind of the guys that came in at the end and put the punctuation mark on it. But as we were in the Situation Room, and I had 6 or 7 meetings with the president, and the discussion came up, and a lot of people have asked, you know, was this a kill mission? And I've made it very clear the intent was not to kill. Your point about capturing was, in fact, part of the moral, legal, and ethical. Contrary to what, you know, folks believe, you know, the SEALs that work for us and the Delta operators, you know, we can be steely-eyed killers, make no mistake about it. My guys that's what they've been doing for the last 15 years. But if you lose your moral compass when doing that, guys can get into a very, very dark place. So you have to constantly reinforce moral, legal, and ethical with them. And you have a moral obligation when you're going after a high-value target like bin Laden or the thousands of other targets that we pursued in my time in special operations. And if that individual is going to give up, and if they're going to surrender, you have a moral obligation to take them into custody. Most of the time for the operations or for the high-value targets we went after, we wanted to capture them because the intelligence value was so important. So frankly, the last thing we wanted to do was kill them. Now, unfortunately, they like to fight, and in the course of the fight, a lot of times guys died, but more times than not, we would capture them. But understanding in the rules of engagement that I provided the guys the night of the bin Laden raid was I said, look, here's the deal. If you get into the room where bin Laden is or wherever he might be, and he clearly is not a threat, if his hands are in the air and he doesn't have a suicide vest on, and the concern was, a lot of these guys, and not just bin Laden, but my guys had been in Iraq and Afghanistan where they walk into a room, guy's got a suicide vest that he sleeps in, and as soon as an Allied soldier comes in, he cranks himself off, and I've lost guys because they, you know, waited 1 second too long, and whole houses have collapsed on top of us when guys have done this. But nonetheless, in that split second, the operator, in this case the SEAL operator, has got to make a decision. Do I shoot him or do I capture him? The one thing I told him was, if you can clearly determine that he's not a threat, you have a moral obligation to capture him. But in the course of the mission, of course, what you need to understand is guys are wearing night vision goggles. It is dark. There had been a blackout that night. They're making their way up. They've killed bin Laden's son. There's a lot going on. The first operator into the room, he sees bin Laden, and bin Laden pushes 2 of his daughters at one of the SEAL operators. One of the other SEAL operators grabs the 2 daughters to pull them out of the way, and there you have bin Laden stand there. You don't know what his next move is. So that SEAL operator doesn't have time to look, because you've got other SEALs around, you've got women and children. You've got to make that split-second decision. Do I think he's not a threat, or do I think he's a potential threat? And so the SEAL operator did exactly what he was supposed to do. But having said that, had bin Laden been alone and clearly not a threat, we would have captured him, because that was our moral obligation. Now back to your point about the burial. During the course of the discussion, one of the meetings, the president asked, well, if we do kill him, what do we do with his body? And we had this opportunity on a number of other high-value targets before, one in particular, where we didn't want to make that particular individual a martyr. And so if you bury him in the desert someplace, then I guarantee you the gravesite becomes a shrine after a while. So several years before I had the opportunity, we'd had a bad guy that was killed in action. We brought him out to a Navy ship, and we followed all the Islamic tradition. You wrap them in a linen shroud. You face their head in a certain direction. You provide, there's certain Islamic prayers that you present, and then you push them off into the ocean. And I guarantee you there's not another country in the world that would have done that. But the point is, we're the United States of America. If we don't hold the moral high ground, who does? And as evil as he was, it's all the more important to do the right thing.
Chancellor, that's exactly why I asked the question. Thank you. Of all the many honors you've received, what are you the most proud of? And there have been a lot.
You know, whenever you're given something by your troops, I think that means more to you than anything. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a great event. It's when a soldier comes up to you and says, you know, thanks for helping me and my family. Georgianne and I spent a lot of time, you know, you have in the course of the years, certainly after 9/11, we lost a lot of guys in combat. You're constantly in the hospital seeing kids that have had their legs blown off, and you know they are damaged irreparably. And any opportunity you can find, again, much of what goes on here at Texas Children's Cancer, you know your opportunity to change the lives of these young men and women, and there were a number of women as well, because you are setting them on the road to success by providing them the right health care. We started, one of the generals before me started what was called the Care Coalition, to take care of our wounded, to make sure that no matter what happened to them, they had kind of a 1-800 number to call. When I took over, we started what we call the preservation of the force and the family. We had initially looked at just the soldiers, but what was apparent after 15 years of war, or 13 at that point in time, was the families were struggling mightily. The divorce rate was up, the suicide rate was up. The young wives, you know, when their husbands would go off to a deployment in Iraq or Afghanistan, you found the wives within certain organizations, when the new wives would come in, they would say, look, honey, what you need to understand is you might as well think your husband is dead now. That way it'll be easier when he comes back in a casket. I mean, these are the dark places that the families get. And the children struggle, and so you had to realize it wasn't just about the soldier. We had put a lot of emphasis on the soldier, but if you don't take care of the family, you have to understand you have a moral obligation to take care of the family as well. Interestingly enough, that was challenging. It was challenging because the money that Congress puts forth is primarily for the individuals. Now there's medical care and others for the families, but not in a way that we had envisioned in this kind of war. So in the special operations community and thankfully in the other services, they really began to focus on the families. And when you have a young wife or a son of a fallen soldier that comes up and says thanks, nothing better.
I read that in addition to trying to procure the utmost in advances scientifically and all that for weaponry, but that the preservation of the force and family was one of your truly great successful initiatives. And I understand that it took several years to get in place, and does it still continue today?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was at the U.S. Special Operations Command for the recent change of command, and it's hitting on all cylinders. And again, it's great to see. And the admiral before me is the one that really kind of identified the problem. And when I got into command, a recommendation kind of landed on my table and said, look, you need to make sure you take a hard look at the problem we're having because the force is fraying. Well, the force was more than frayed. The force was incredibly strained. I mean, if you can imagine 15 years, and that's what these kids have been through. Starting in 9/11, most of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that work for me, they'd been at this for 15 years. And the way our cycle works is they deploy forward, I mean, some cases for a year, 18 months, and then they'd come back for maybe a year, then deploy forward again for a year or 8 or 6 months, and they did that constantly for 15 years. And it's not just about going forward. It's about going forward into combat. And it's about going forward and, again, seeing your buddies killed or wounded and knowing that you got to get up the next morning and go do the mission. And, again, it's not just the special operations guys. This was true of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the reservists that were over there. Everybody that was in that, saw something that changed their life forever. But what is amazing about them is these are all volunteers. I mean, all these kids, it's an all-volunteer force. And we don't have a problem getting these young men and women to join. They are joining in such numbers that, we've got to kind of stop them coming in. This is the kind of commitment this young generation has. They are by far and away the greatest generation of this century. I know they will be.
We saw in the video Georgianne's reference to the many moves and all that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about what it takes to have a successful marriage with a great family like you have.
Yeah, you got to marry up. That's all there is to it.
There you have it.
That's all there is to it. As a lot of folks out there in the audience know, when you're young, you fall in love. And I didn't know much about the Navy. Georgianne certainly didn't know much about the Navy. And as she said, actually, I took her to a movie called The Deep. And for those of you that remember that movie, for a young guy, it was a very memorable movie. But it was set in Bermuda. And at one point in time, as we were dating, I said, honey, one of these days, we could be stationed there in Bermuda. She reminds me of that often, particularly when we were at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. She said, when is Bermuda coming? I said, I'm not sure, honey. But again, the great thing about being young is you're young. We had 3 great kids, but when my first son was born, I left a week later for a deployment into the Western Pacific. My number 2 son was born in the Philippines and in a jungle hospital. And a couple of years, Georgianne probably doesn't want me to tell the story, but a couple of years ago, we had a chance to get back to the Philippines. I had to head down to where some fighting was going on. And Georgianne went back to this old base where we had lived. And a couple days later, we linked back up, and I come back into the hotel room, and she says, did you realize that John was born in a Quonset hut? I said, yeah, actually I did. It was fairly primitive, but he turned out to be a PhD in theoretical physics. So there's something to be said for Quonset huts, I think. And then I was not around when my daughter was born because I was off for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So this is just kind of the life of a person in the military. We moved a lot, and as Georgianne said, those experiences for kids, I think if you keep them active, and all our kids played sports, they were active in school. Georgianne just did a magnificent job of taking care of them. They've all turned out great. We're very proud of them. And is it trying? You bet it is. But it also puts them in a position, there isn't anything life throws at them that they're not going to be ready for because they've seen most of it growing up.
Last year, you released a document dealing with the 8 quantum leaps that you were looking at on initiatives by the University of Texas system, and we're not going to have enough time to go through all of them, but I'd like to ask you about a couple of them.
Sure.
One is the American Leadership Program that you described. Can you, first of all, tell us why you think leadership is important at a university level, and then secondly, what you are trying to do with this particular initiative and some of the people behind it?
Well, when we went out and did a strategic assessment, so we spent 4 or 5 months taking a look at all the data, and getting back to one of the earlier points I made, it was, tell us what Texas needs. And so our task force kind of went out and canvassed all the data we could, and clearly the signal coming from the workplace was, hey, we clearly want people that are technically proficient, but we also want leaders. And I think all of you that run organizations, you understand the value of leadership, how to function in a small team, how to communicate well, how to write well, the sort of things that leaders need to know, how to be moral, legal, and ethical. If you don't get those 3 things right, you're building your company on a house of cards. And we have some great leadership programs across the University of Texas system, as you well know, Mike. But what I wanted to do was, we have 217,000 students. I know it's ambitious, but I'd like every student that comes through a University of Texas academic and health related institution to have an opportunity to have some leadership training. What I've put out there as a challenge is I want to have a lower division course, a 1-hour lower division course, a 1-hour upper division course. So that gives you about 26 hours of leadership training / education in the course of your 4 years. And we're going to map out all the programs that are out there, and then we're going to begin to build the curriculum so that, again, every student that comes out of UT will have some experience in leadership. And I think this is vital, that we are creating leaders in Texas that can go out there and not just represent Texas, but represent the world.
Absolutely. One of the other quantum leaps involved the purchase of a large piece of property here, real estate here in Houston.
Here in Houston?
Here in Houston.
Houston?
Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard it
I've
mentioned.
heard a little bit about it. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. My information is that we already have sort of a large presence here through the system. We've got MD Anderson, UT Health, and a number of other activities underway here. Can you tell us about that purchase, what your thoughts were in looking at that, and then what the current status of the group looking at its future use will be?
Yeah, so part of this was recognizing that, again, I feel it's a responsibility of any university system to kind of push the edge of the envelope. I mean, I'm a risk taker. I don't know that you achieve anything great without pushing the bounds. And I realized, one, I looked back as I was starting my first couple of months, and you look at the Breckenridge track, you look at what Littlefield did, you look at how UTMB started. UTMB, if it didn't have Sealy and Smith, where would it be? UT Dallas, all of these things kind of started with a piece of property. You have to have property. And a lot of people have criticized me, and maybe fairly so, for, well, you bought this property, but you didn't have a plan on how you were going to use it. I said, well, no, I had a plan. The plan was buy the property, then bring together some great Houstonians to take a look at how do we now develop this property focused on higher education, research, innovation. What I know is I'm not the brightest guy in terms of understanding what the Houston needs are, but we have formed a magnificent task force. I think 3 of them are here tonight. Jody Giles, Bobby Robbins is here, and Ping Sun, and we've got Paul Hobby and Karen Barth are the 2 co-chairs. And what I've asked them to do, my kind of mandate to them, is we have an opportunity to relook how we deliver education. The hard part with having institutions that are already brick and mortar, I mean, this great tower behind me, is you have an institution that's been there for 100+ years, and I knew coming in it was going to be difficult to radically change or to change the way we delivered education at the University of Texas, and maybe we don't need to do that. But here's an opportunity for us to relook it. I mean, we've got a blank piece of paper, and I've said, let's take a look at that. Can we deliver a quality education in 3 years? Can you do it without tenure? Can you do it on a competency-based approach? I don't know, but we ought to look at it. We shouldn't be afraid to look at these bold ideas. And so the other part of this is we've got higher education. We also want to figure out, how does higher education intersect with research in a way that, again, we haven't thought about before? What's the public-private interface here? How do we innovate? And most importantly, how do we collaborate? One of the things I talked about in my vision speech to the Board of Regents last November is what we learned after 9/11 as a special operations group and as a military was, if you don't collaborate, if you don't adapt, then you will be ineffective in a very short period of time. And when you're chasing tough, complicated problems, higher education is a tough, complicated problem. When you're chasing hard, complicated problems as we were chasing a terrorist organization, you have got to collaborate. You have to understand what the guy in the foxhole is saying and what the guy in Washington, D.C. is saying. You have to take in all perspectives. So what I want to do is I want to figure out, how do we collaborate? How do we collaborate with the great academic institutions that are across Texas and across the nation? How do we collaborate with research? How do we collaborate with the private industry? I don't have the answers to that. I'm hoping that this task force will bring me something that is a framework to which then I can put kind of the meat on the bones. Right now, again, we've got 18 folks on the task force. They're doing great work. I was just with them yesterday. And while I don't want to go into a lot of details, I will tell you they are working very, very hard. And if you doubt me, talk to Jody or Ping or Bobby. There is a great connection going on. I think they've developed, of course, most of them knew each other, but you see this kind of great relationship because they realize there is something really powerful that can come out of this. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should embrace it. At the end of the day, though, it's on me. And this is the one thing I've told the folks in Houston, the folks in Texas. It's my responsibility. I'm the one that commissioned the task force. I'm the one that purchased the property. So if we're not successful, then it's my responsibility. I want to make us successful. I want to make us successful for Texas. And in doing so, we will change the way we do higher education and research to help the young men and women in Texas. I think that's a noble and laudable goal, and I think we can get there with the great folks that are on this task force.
I'd like to make a statement briefly. We athletic directors at the member institutions gather as a body at the system office, and thank you for supporting that. The Mavericks, the Longhorns, the Comets, the Miners, the Falcons, the Vaqueros, the Roadrunners, and the Patriots of the University of Texas system appreciate you very much. I need to let y'all in on a secret. This is not generally known yet, but I've been authorized to release it tonight. It'll officially come out in a couple of days, but the National Football Foundation is a well-known organization of athletic institutions across the country that honors football players with induction into the College Football Hall of Fame. One of those members from my team is here tonight, Chris Gilbert, and another of our guests, Murray Bowden, is not only a member of the National Football Foundation College Hall of Fame, but also on the board of directors. And the president, Steve Hatchell, has authorized me to tell y'all that this year's recipient of the Distinguished American Award, which is the highest award that can be given by the National Football Foundation, will be presented to our Chancellor on December the 6th in New York. Well-deserved honor.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.
He will be joining, this will be the 46th time that award has been presented, and he'll be joining people like Tom Brokaw, Bob Hope, Vince Lombardi, Jimmy Stewart, and others who have been well recognized and deserving of that award. I will mention that as a foot soldier for you, I'm honored and delighted to be at your service and to work with you on behalf of the student athletes of the University of Texas system. And we greatly appreciate you being here with us tonight.
Well, thanks. But before we finish, if I can just say one or two things. First, Mike, let me thank you for stepping up and being the AD. As you know, we went through some kind of, I think, a couple of tough years, and Mike stepped in and has just done an absolutely fabulous job. Let me tell you how I know this, because I don't hear from the coaches who you would expect to hear it from. I hear from the players. And you know, when you make an impact on a player, because they see how the coaches are fired up, how the coaches are inspired, they see the work that both you and Melinda are doing on behalf of the University of Texas. Mike and Melinda don't miss a single game of a single sport. I don't know how you do it. But I want to personally thank you, Mike, for the phenomenal work you've done. And lastly, I want to thank the Texas Children's Cancer Center here. I was so honored to have this opportunity to come here tonight to really just reinforce the great work that the researchers and the doctors and the support staff do to take care of these magnificent young children. I can't think of anything more noble. So I want to thank you for allowing me to come here tonight. This is, you asked, what's been my greatest honor? this will be right at the top of the list. So thank you all so very, very much. Mike, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
You're making an honorary doctor tonight. You can put that on, but you don't have to.
No, I'm happy to
But
do it.
anyway, that's your
You
lab
think
coat
it'll fit me?
from the Texas Children's Cancer Center.
Wouldn't my mother be surprised?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you very much.
Great job, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Way to go, Chancellor Bill. Mike,
Thank you.
fantastic
Thank you.
job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for supporting Texas Children's Cancer Center and have a wonderful evening.